Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Megan Shamus. I am the CMO of the FIDO Alliance, and this is our fourth in a series of webinars dedicated to our latest design guidelines. Today's session is actually an AMA. So always when we host these kinds of webinars, we end up getting questions, many more than we typically can answer. So we love to have like an open AMA where we can just answer your questions, let you engage with our experts here, and just get closer to them. Before we start, I will go through everybody's favorite housekeeping. So you'll notice that you're in listen only mode, but you do have a question widget, which is where I'd love you to input your questions. I do have several questions that were held over from previous webinars, so we do have plenty of questions, but we would love for you to engage with our experts here. So please do ask your questions. Please keep your questions to things around design and content and UX around Passkeys implementation if possible. We will be having more of a technical AMA later this summer if you want to come and ask technical implementation questions. But for the purposes of today, we'd love for you to ask your UX and content questions. We are recording the webinar, and you will have access to the webcast directly following this. And finally, please stay on and take the survey at the conclusion of the webinar. And I have been reading actually the surveys from the last three, and I want to thank you for your feedback, all very positive feedback, and some great ideas for ways that we can do further webinars on this topic. On the topic of on-demand webcasts, you can access the 3 design webinars that we've held to date on demand. If you've not registered, you can simply go to our website and register, and then you can view all of these webcasts. There were 3, more of a foundational webinar, which we held on the 11th of June, how to work your authentication experiences to help align with your internal business goals. And then that was on the 18th. And then the one we held last week was on how you can actually drive revenue and decrease costs with Passkeys. And that was a really great one that we held last week. So these are all accessible to you. So please do take the time to view them if you haven't yet.
I'm sorry, Megan, did you say you wanted to pass it over to me?
I do want to pass it over to you. Thank you.
I saw Nancy's question already in the Q&A, and I was typing away. Thanks so much, Megan. Yeah, the FIDO Alliance UX Working Group is made up of a whole bunch of companies within the FIDO Alliance. We have 6 or 7 of members of those different companies here today with us. But we always like to remind people that the design guidelines that FIDO produces are created by a very diverse group of companies and people within those companies. And then we also like to send a special thank you to the underwriters of the design guidelines. Creating these design guidelines each year just costs us money and costs FIDO Alliance money. And these companies help to underwrite those costs. So I'm going to say them out loud. We have 1Password, Cisco Duo, Dashlane, Google, HID, Trusona, US Bank, and Ubico. I'd like to thank all those again. And Megan, back to you.
Thank you, Kevin. So please let me introduce our panel of experts here to answer all of your questions. You may recognize them from the webinars that we've held the past several weeks and probably from last year's as well. We have Elizabeth Beasley, who is the Senior Content Designer at Intuit. We have Philip Corview, the Senior Manager of User Experience at RSA. James is not here yet, but we're hoping he's going to join us. He's the Senior Product Designer at Microsoft. We have Mitchell Gallivan, the Lead Authentication UXD at Google. We have Kevin Goldman, who needs no introduction, but he is the Chief Experience Officer at Trusona. And Court Morgan, who is the Lead UX Content Designer at Google. Also, all of these folks are members of our UX working group, of course, and Kevin and Mitchell are our co-chairs of the group. Before we get started with the questions, I swear we're going to answer questions today. It is an AMA after all. We were hoping to take just a quick pulse check on everyone, and we just have a couple poll questions that we wanted to ask you. This really helps to inform like which questions we answer, and really just to gauge what what our audience is kind of up to. Whoops. Oh, I screwed this up. Hold on, I have to fix this. 1 second. Poll question. Poll question. That was my fault. I built the polls wrong, but it should be good now. Okay. Poll question. Here we go. First question is, have you implemented Passkeys? So we have several options for answers. I'm just talking because I want to give you a little time to answer the question. Yes, we're fully rolled out. Yes, we're in the process. But someone moving the slides. Have you implemented Passkeys? Sorry. Yes, we're fully rolled out. Yes, we're in the process. No in planning. No in early discovery. And no, not interested. I'm hoping you're not here for E, but I'm still interested in knowing. So let's take about 10 seconds and get some answers. I see some answers coming in. %. Wait like 5 more seconds. Come on, folks. There we go. So let's wait till we get to like, see if we can get to 40%. 30. A few more answers. All right, let's see what we got. Okay, so we have many in the planning stages. We have some that are fully rolled out, some in the process, some in early discovery. This is all good. This is sort of probably what we were expecting, having folks join us to ask questions, probably in planning stages, so that's great. Next question. Have you looked at the design guidelines on the FIDO Alliance website? Have you viewed these? Okay. See the answers coming in. We'll just give it like 10 more seconds. Okay. And some that had no idea they existed. Well, we're glad you're here, because after this you will. But a lot of yeses and a few no's and some that just didn't know they existed. So that's good to know. And then last question, have you leveraged design guidelines for your own implementation, understanding that some of you are in the planning stages or discovery, but if you have, if you're planning to, that would be great for us to know. Okay, then we got answers coming in. Give it like 10 more seconds. All right. Yay! Wow, that's great. Awesome. Okay, now, if you're one of the folks that you haven't viewed the guidelines yet, or they didn't know they existed, This is the QR code to get them. Also, FIDOalliance.org/design-guidelines, very easy to find. Please do view them. And now we will get into, I'm going to leave this up for a while, just in case folks want to take a look while we're talking. All right, so let's get into our questions. And I see we have a bunch in the question widget already, so thank you. Let's start with, this is actually a really interesting question regarding timelines, and then we can get into a little bit more questions about the actual guidelines. So what does it look like in terms of time from, setting up passkeys, including, design into implementation, understanding, from your perspectives as the designers, what does that look like for your own implementations, or what you've heard, from other, about other implementations? Any rough estimates of timelines? Elizabeth, you want to take that one?
That's a tricky one. I mean, because we've been working on this for a couple of years, so I will say it's taken a while, timeline-wise, and we've kind of been working a lot of stuff with our engineering team, and I'm on the content design team, and so the UX design team is kind of working a lot of stuff with our engineers. It's kind of back and forth of we're using the FIDO Alliance guidelines to kind of paint the picture and figure out how we want this experience to look and what we think it should do. But then we're also kind of going to our engineers and being like, does this work? Is this have you guys, they're trying to do their proof of concept. So it's a lot of back and forth, which is really different than other things I've worked on where a lot of the tech is kind of baked already. So this is a really collaborative thing. I mean, we're still we just finished our designs, and that's taken us about, I would say we were really hustling for 3-4 months getting that done. We've been kind of slowly working on it for a while and kind of had some stops and starts. But now the engineers are trying to make sure that can all the use cases be done. So we're probably not going to launch for another 4 months. So I feel like I don't know if that's helpful, but I feel like it is a commitment of, taking time. You got to figure it out as you go. And I know that as we start to implement it, there are going to still be more questions. And so it's a lot of, and then, once we get going, then I feel like it's going to be constantly an iterative process forever. But sometimes that helps in a broader scale, but
yeah, no, that's super helpful. Kevin, I wondered if you could touch on that question in terms of approaches you could take or phases you could implement in terms of implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. You can implement passkeys in so many different ways with so many different kinds of strategies. For consumer use cases, it's sometimes helpful just to think about 3 different possible strategies. One is the absolute bare bones. And we have some design patterns, 2 of them, that will get you on the path to implement the bare bones to just get the necessities of passkeys for people to use them. Now, that said, the bare bones approach, you may not be able to drive adoption quickly, but it's just getting the basics in place. And we think that to get that to launch, is right around 6 months, 6 to 8 months from early discovery design and get it out the door. But if you take another strategy, which is say door number 2, which is, hey, my company's all in on passkeys. We want the business benefits as quickly as possible. And to drive those business benefits as quickly as possible, you want to migrate your existing customer base to passkeys as quickly as possible. And so that wouldn't be a bare bones implementation. You'd want to cover more use cases and more quickly have people adopt and create passkeys. That we're just saying is around a year and a half, to get to that point. But you're going to, once you launch, you're going to get much faster benefits, cost benefits, security benefits of passkeys, because your adoption curve will be so much faster. The last strategy, which is door number 3, would be if you if your company chooses to completely eliminate passwords and you're looking to eliminate passwords as quickly as possible, so that once somebody creates a pass key, that either they can't use a password or they're highly discouraged using a password. And that takes even more planning. And with that strategy, your company might also say, hey, we want to launch to all regions in all different use cases. If you have that broad of a strategy, then you're probably looking at a, closer to 2-year initial rollout, and then more time after that to effectively get rid of those passwords.
I was just going to say kind of what Kevin used just explained what I was talking about, but we're going like path 2, like we're kind of like all in the, in the middle, like year and a half. So yay, you validated my life. This is good. But you were talking about like where we're rolling out, we're going to like build it on web first because you could still use it on native. So it's kind of like, there's a lot of these things of like, here's where we're going to build it and test it first before we can implement on native, because then we've got some other things that are holding us up there. So it is a lot of strategy, and the strategy is changing based on sort of everything else happening in your priority list. But yeah, and so we were like, okay, we're going to go let people do it when they create an account. We're going to do it in sign in, and we're going to do it here in account services. So we've got kind of lots of places there to create them, and then they can use them on native mobile like immediately, and then we'll have them create a mobile label. So that's kind of like how we're doing it, and it's everybody's got their own way, but the strategy does really kind of depend on like what can we get done now, so hopefully that's helpful to whoever was asking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, of course. And like it's also size, how many users you have, how many geos, and I think that is the best way to answer that, given not knowing, the particulars of the person who asked the question in their environment. So I want to get into a couple of questions regarding enrollment. So the guidelines, the guidelines recommend, and folks can dig into the guidelines, but recommend offering or prompting for passkey enrollment during account-related tasks, or if they're experiencing some pain with authentication. So let's say they're doing a reset, or they're doing like they've just finished authenticating with a password plus SMS OTP, for example. Get this question a lot. We got this question a few times during the series, but why do I not want to prompt for enrollment just after authentication? Is this a no-no? Is there going to be a point in time where we should start doing that, or is that just, how do you know when to kind of change your approach or add more prompts?
Happy to jump in, or anybody else, either way. I can kick it off and then hand it off to others. When we did initial research a year ago, not as many people were familiar with what a passkey was, and when you prompted to create a passkey right after sign-in, it interrupted the person's task. They were signing in to make a purchase for something they need in their house in 2 days, and that was most important. Or they were signing in to refill a prescription, and that was most important. And at those moments, they didn't want to be distracted by something that was security related that they didn't understand. Fast forward a year, and it's only been a year, and the perception's already changing. And a lot to do with, we have Mitchell and Court here from Google, with 400 million plus users creating passkeys on Google accounts, and all the other services that are now offering passkeys. It's quickly becoming much more recognizable. So although our guidelines from FIDO Alliance still say that may not be the optimal time, depending on your company and who your customers are and what the use case is and how you frame it, it's worth exploring and doing some of your own testing, because you may get good at, the whole industry is going to get better and better adoption, prompting after sign in with password, because it's more of a known entity. One last thing I'll say is that on the new Apple announced just a few weeks ago that on the new iOS devices that they will automatically be creating passkeys. So that's another adoption path for people. If they sign in with the password manager, the Apple password manager, and a passkey is available to be registered, Apple will automatically create that passkey and then use that passkey on subsequent logins.
And we do, I'm sure y'all have seen it, right after you successfully sign in on Google with a password, that's when you're most likely to get prompted to go ahead and create a passkey for your Google account. And we've seen a fair amount of success there. And we do know that some other relying parties, smaller than ours, have also tried that out for themselves with their customer base and seen some success. So again, like Kevin was saying, like before it was pretty unknown. We rolled out with it as we get more awareness of the factor itself. We're feeling more confident with that placement because it is a security related moment. But again, I wouldn't do that without taking into consideration the other guidelines that we have, like leading with the benefit, like why are you interrupting them right now? It's so that this will be easier later. But we do at Google like to talk about passkeys and security related moments because we know that largely that's not why users are online. So if they're already thinking about it, that's something you could consider and see if that resonates for y'all.
Yeah, I think, Court, the main thing that you just touched upon there was the education. I remember in the last webinar I did, I have a base layer of education to your users because a lot of them don't understand why it's there. And so articulating the security benefits, but not slowing down their experience to get to their end goal is very, very critical. But I think it's an important point in the flow to try and capture them to get them to go to passkeys.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth has a really fun deviation if you didn't catch our webinar. So we rolled out, we found what was most resonant with our users was simplicity, convenience, and then more recently speed. But actually what made sense for Elizabeth was more security. Yeah, so I think you you take these guidelines and figure out what works for your users.
Yeah, I tested I call it Court's headline, it's Google's headline, whatever, but I tested it against my mind, and I was like, let's see who wins with my users. And I really thought that Google was going to win because I was like, people have seen this, I love it. But our customers with QuickBooks that spend a lot of money on this product and, are accountants and bookkeepers, and they're very critical and scrutinize everything, they were like, I need this security. And so I highly recommend testing these things with your customers to see what gets them excited about adoption and that kind of thing.
That's definitely something we recommend with the FIDO Alliance guidelines is finding the benefit that resonates with your audience. And so this is something that Court and I have presented at different events like at FIDO and then also Identiverse, where we really want folks to sort of think about what resonates most. So with Elizabeth's audience, it was of course security, and with Google's audience, as we described before, it was convenience and speed. And really emphasizing that sign in faster aspect has proven to be very helpful for our particular audience. But it's very likely that your audience may find something different. So it's great to ABCD test different propositions and see. Also, another thing to keep in mind with the FIDO UX guidelines is simply that we invite you to sort of think about passkeys during account related moments. So if your user is involved in something to do with your account, that can be a good time to talk about passkeys. And of course, authentication is the big front door. That's why it's very beneficial and useful there and very successful. Another time that's even slightly more successful is during account recovery. If you can encourage your user to create a passkey once they've recovered their account, you can remind them that, hey, isn't dealing with a password difficult? Try using a passkey next time to sort of skip that action. And so these things can be very helpful. And we do find that the more engaged the user is with authentication, specifically with account recovery, because account recovery can indeed be challenging, we do see even higher adoption in cases like that. But that's not the big, bright, beautiful front door like passkey during sign-in is. We don't want to put people into account recovery, just to get them into passkeys.
Yeah, we're definitely not advising that you lock all of your users out and then tell them the solution is to upgrade to a passkey.
It's a fresh start. It's just a fresh start. speaking of, channels, like for, prompting, what does the guidelines say, or what did you see in your research or your individual company research around leveraging additional channels for like that baseline education, like for example, email, or, heroes or things like that? I know there's like the space for heroes is like on a website is not great, but like leveraging other channels just to say, hey, like we're rolling this out. Is there a benefit to like letting folks know in advance this is coming? Is this a channel that like we haven't seen? Are these channels worthwhile for that kind of baseline education that you want folks to have if they're going to get a prompt later?
Absolutely. I think that different kinds of channels beyond just the sign-in moment is really helpful because, for example, at Google, we really want users to stay signed in because it's the most convenient, right? And so if you are on your laptop, the same laptop every day, and you're opening up Gmail, it's not often that we'll ask you to authenticate again unless, some of our heuristics indicate that maybe it's a good idea. And so I think that email, social media, and other pathways, ways that may work, that you may have to connect with your audience, to let them know that your authentication is evolving or changing or upgrading and that they expect some changes, that can be very helpful. We talk a lot about our big, beautiful front door, the sign-in moment, and that's because that's where the majority of our users come through. It's the most impactful. But again, communicating with the users and providing that information to them, either in a blog, press release, like I said, social media, like I said, email, these things can all come together to create like a cohesive narrative from your company to let a user understand what's happening. And even if they don't engage with that, the material is still available. So they can be linked to them if they have questions, or if they decide to do some of their own research and understand it better, they can find it. And that can be really to sort of have that unified perspective to conveying information about Passkeys to your user base.
Yeah, from an RSA perspective, just to touch on the enterprise use case for a sec, right, is that we produce all the educational collateral for our customers for them to send to their users because they provide all their internal training for their users. So as we change the authentication methods, as we start to add passkeys, we really have to educate two audiences, the admin as to what to choose for policy and assurance levels, and then material for them to get their end users to understand and adopt passkeys before it's forced upon them. And that understanding that, we're not doing anything behind the scenes, it is about security, convenience, and user experience is really critical to drive that type of adoption. But if we don't do that, we can't expect our customers to because the load's just too heavy on them.
Yeah. And I'm going to be kind of a, not contrarian, but just a different perspective. So like Phil's got this enterprise thing where we can like make people do stuff and we're going to have to nudge them, encourage them. But I don't know if you guys might also be like, well, like we're not a huge team. Our identity team is not like as massive as the entire QuickBooks product team. So I'm like, we're trying to get this thing out the door and I haven't gotten any support to make emails yet. Like it's like, it's the last on the list. But the cool thing about Passkeys is it's to me like this evolutional, like it's going to evolve. So I'm not stressed about it because I was like, let's just get this out the door, get customers using it, see if it's, we hope they built it so easy. It's so easy that they don't even have to ask questions, right? That's my hope. So we're kind of going to this like, they're going to love it. It's going to be easy. But if it's not, and we've gotten the pressure off of building it, then I can be like, okay, now let's go try to talk to some people and like getting this email done. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, that's like the real talk about how the timeline is working. But I think it will be easier for me to kind of say, all right, so now we've got some numbers. Only 10% have adopted. We want to increase that. Let's get some communication strategy going. So that's kind of how I'm handling it with the timeline part.
I love the frankness of the small team as a person who is also on a small team. Is like, have you ever thought about doing this one thing? And you're like, of course I have. It's just I don't have enough people to do that.
I don't have the time. But I might have the time once we launch. So yeah, you can definitely face things. So make it work. But I would love to do that personally. I'm like, yeah, let's tell the world about it and get them excited. I mean, I've written some FAQs. Those are there. So it's kind of like you figure out your communications the best you can.
Yeah, and I feel like part of the vision of the design guidelines and of additional assets that the FIDO Alliance has coming is to be able to provide like drag and drop kind of stuff like that, so you don't have to write your own FAQs, you don't have to write your own email copy, for example. and that can hopefully save time and resourcing, but it's also been, research. So like we know hopefully what's working and what's not working.
A fun secret thing that I just did. So and the guidelines, I actually helped write the email templates for us to all use. So yay, when I get around to it, I made myself a template. It was really serving myself to get that done, but hopefully everyone will use it. But I was working on FAQs like the other week, and I was like, you know what? There are a ton of FAQs out there, thanks to all my UX friends working on Passkeys have written them, and I was like, there's no need for me to rethink the wheel. So I used some AI tools to whip up some FAQs, and I understood it enough where I knew whether it was correct or not, because I've read a lot about a year ago. So, but it was kind of nice because sometimes it gets so complex when you've been in it for a while that you're like, what is the basics of this anymore? So I used AI to help me kind of get back to basics of like what it thinks Passkeys are from looking at the internet. So that's my little tip on making communications easier.
Elizabeth, that's so true. I have to give a shout out to Sony and all the communications they did at their launch, because they went the whole other direction and said, this is going to be a big launch. And the video they produced and the landing page for Passkeys and all the communications and marketing, it was so coordinated with such great storytelling. And they had they chose door number 3, so it was a different approach. Not to say one's better than the other, they just chose that other one. But it's great that it exists now, because now, as if you're looking at Passkeys, you can look at all these great examples and draw from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting to look at the like not just the implementation timeline, but like what was the launch strategy. And I actually I've been documenting some of these because it's really interesting, the different approaches that some of these like large consumer relying parties have taken, and like all successful but different, right? So that is also a really interesting, it's like, okay, we're done, but now how do we actually launch it, to the public, is a really, I think, an interesting case study to look at. Welcome, James. So James is here. Yay.
Hey.
We also have David Turner here, who has joined just in case there was a very technical question that we desperately wanted to answer. So thank you, David. He's our senior director of standards. Okay, I want to talk about, I have so many things I want to talk about. Okay, I wanted to ask one more question about the guidelines, and then I have I have a couple more questions about the specifics in there. Again, mobile versus desktop. So this is a question we get a lot, but trying to distill it down. I mean, obviously there are different platforms, different operating systems, different browsers, but even the way that consumers and even employees, because employees are consumers too, look at authentication is different based on what device they're on. Of course, on a phone or a smartphone, they're more used to using biometrics and things like that, where they might not be as much on their laptop. Hopefully that is decreasing, but do the guidelines cover, or are the guidelines different for how to communicate on these different device types? Or is that even a thing that folks should contemplate? Or is it kind of general enough to cover all of the use cases that that a consumer might be, or devices that a consumer might be signing in with? And is it really all that different? Or is that kind of a myth?
So
It's go right ahead, Cord.
I would say that the more specific the language you can have, the better. So if you know that you're pushing something to mobile, I would talk about, your fingerprint face scan or PIN. If you know that you're pushing something to desktop, then I would say screen lock or device lock, or however it is that you talk about that. It's difficult with getting more specific beyond device type, because you don't necessarily know, and by design, which modality a user has set up or will set up their passkey with, if it will be a pin or a face or, what have you. And that's just a limitation by the API. And we have played with even using like branded language for some of that functionality when we've been going to a specific platform and a specific device type, but that hasn't necessarily moved the needle all that much. We just like it from a usability, at least from a content design usability perspective. Like the closer you can get to the action that you want to ask about or you want the user to do, the better.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think it's a really interesting idea to think about, like specific language per platform, and I think there's a lot of content and usability benefits to specificity. But as Court mentioned, that's not always when the numbers shake out. We don't always see the value. So this is a case where I think the FIDO UX guidelines are very broad, and we invite you to sort of check those out. And those are applicable to all platforms, regardless of modality. And you should be able to apply some of the great lessons in there. When it comes to your own content, this is another time that I would have to defer back to you, the audience, and then you would have to go to your audience and figure out what helps them. I know that every product, every service usually leans a particular way, whether it's mobile, desktop, whether it's Apple or Microsoft or Android. And so I think that can help you start to think about where it may be most useful to put your energy in terms of figuring out your content strategy.
It's also where you can work with your engineering team to figure out just how like specific and targeted you can be in the variations that you decide to put out. Again, not really big teams, but if you collaborate with those engineers, it can be pretty quick to whip out a couple of different strings over the same design and get that out to a subset of your users that you know on a particular device. And that could be one way to really see if it's worth maintaining multiple versions.
I just want to say for Microsoft as an RP, for us, we've tested in terms of usability studies on like sign in faster with a passkey versus sign in faster with modalities, sign in faster with face fingerprint pin and security key. Basically everything we've listed out in one go, because we don't know which ones they're registering it to and which one they would be using. But it is interesting that when we did that sort of testing, it's early on in the fate. It's still early on for passkeys. People don't understand that compared to what they're already used to, which was those modalities. And so that's what we shipped with for now for Microsoft as an RP. And so when you sign in, you'll say sign in with your face, fingerprint, or PIN. It's a mouthful. And my hope is that after Passkeys gets more and more socialized with more and more people and people just know what it is, we get to a point where I don't have to say face, fingerprint, PIN, and security key each time, and that it's as ubiquitous as, Visa accepted here, contactless payment accepted here. People just know Passkey, but it's still early on. We need to just associate that with what people know, and we'll get to that point ideally soon.
Yeah, I think I was trying to find the spot. Kevin would know this off the top of his head, so I'm not going to try to find it. But isn't it, so like we saw that in the research, right? That the modalities that were familiar resonated, but we also have some language like introduced the term passkey as well. Sign in with these things, and then but there's like some reference to passkeys, so that when the OS prompt says passkeys, they're not like, what are we talking about, right?
So I don't know what section it's in specifically in the guidelines, but I actually just wrote this out for someone this morning. Typically, at least within the description, so the body copy of your design, we want to say use your fingerprint, face scan, or screen lock to securely sign in with a passkey, or with a passkey you can now sign in securely and faster or however you want to phrase that, with your fingerprint face or screen lock. So the idea being that that new term gets associated with familiar terms, and it also allows the user to go ahead and self-educate by seeing, oh, it's a passkey, and also the API is going to pop up and show you the word passkeys, just like you said, and it won't be too much of a surprise, and they can go connect to the rest of all of that rich information online about how it actually works and how it's more secure. Additionally, if they want to go manipulate how they're configuring their factors on your site, they need to know where to find that setting in their security settings, which it likely, per the guidelines, will be in a section labeled Passkeys. So helping them connect the dots on what it is that they're creating, what they can learn about, and how to manage it.
Pretty sure we have something that's along the lines of relating the new unfamiliar thing with the familiar. So like within our UI, we definitely have copy that says, let me reiterate. So use your passkey to sign into your Microsoft account with your face, fingerprint, or PIN. So we still have that with it. We're still trying to socialize it, but trying to connect the dots together.
James, I have to go back.
I'm going to put this out to everybody. This the actual URL for that we're referring to for this language. Let me see. I can push it.
Yeah. This kind of topic is all over the design guidelines. I have to give a shout out to James because last year, when we were trying to figure out some of this language, Court had the language that worked really well. And then James, you had that icon that showed a passkey icon plus the different biometric icons.
Yeah.
And the combination of what Court had and what you had was like the perfect combination. Because it said passkeys, but it also said the words, and it also had the visual. All of those tied together really helped people know, okay, I'm comfortable with this. I know what this is.
For sure.
I'll just chime in too, because I just finished the designs, and it's tough to know what to do, particularly for your company. So I used all my resources, right? I read the FIDO guidelines, and I was like, this is like my foundation, and they had words that I wanted to use, and everything. And then I did my audits of companies that I knew were using passkeys, and they're kind of all different because everybody's got different strategies. So there was no answer there. There's no clear answer there either. So I had to look at it all and say all right, so what's going to work for my customers, my use cases, and that kind of thing. So it is a lot of it's just great because you have all of these resources, but at the end of the day, you can either use off the shelf, or tested Google's headline, or you can just really absorb it and then be like, this is what I recommend. I did spend a lot of time, my team would ask well, how's everyone else doing it? Because with sign-in and stuff, a bazillion people do it. It's not really radical, but I was like, everyone's doing it differently, guys. Passkeys is really unique. So I would just have to make recommendations on this is what I've seen that I think works for us. Look at what Sony did. And the cool thing about the working group is that we're all sharing this stuff all the time in Slack. So I would be grabbing screens all the time, look, someone found this. So that's kind of how I've been processing, figuring out how Intuit wants to do it, right? So it's a fun puzzle.
Yeah, and the sharing is really important. To the point about James's illustration, sometimes an illustration can do a lot more than words. For example, we're doing some new, FIDO Alliance is doing some new video assets, and our agency came up with this way to show the modalities, but also somehow show in one kind of circle that the biometric is sort of used to invoke the passkey, and not the biometric equals the passkey, which is actually Nancy in our questions was saying we don't want folks to necessarily think that passkeys equal biometrics because there's connotations with that, which is of course true, but that I looked at it, I was like, that gets that across without us having to say, here's how public key cryptography works, because nobody wants to learn about that necessarily. But I love the the idea of leveraging video and things if you have the real estate to do that. Stay tuned soon for our new video assets. Okay, so there's a question I wanted, so this is again just about kind of the authentication flow stuff. And then I want to ask a question about metrics. So cross-device sign-in, I think the idea of cross-device sign-in is like one of the best things about Passkeys and FIDO2 in general. And just being able to sign in, you know, to another device from a device is like, so I have a whole story about Gmail that I'm going to share at Authenticate 2024 about how much it like has saved my life in many ways for speed, for anyway. Stay tuned for that. Come to Authenticate. But have we tested cross-device sign-in with consumers yet? And like how are they responding to that? Maybe you have within your own orgs. I don't know if we have with FIDO's research, but the use of like QR code, like how is that being received, and how are you positioning that to your user base?
So this is something that we're really interested in because I think that the hybrid or QR code journey of Passkeys is sort of like a fundamental part of the spec. I'm really excited about the automatically syncing, always available, ready to go part of Passkeys. I think that's a really powerful part of the story. But then the QR code system too, that's really great as well. And so this is something that we have been doing some quantitative testing on, and we do have qualitative testing scheduled for this year. And we'll get to learn some more information there. Before we launched Passkeys, we did did a gut check on audiences' familiarity or willingness to scan a QR code. And it seemed as though, as a sort of as a result of the pandemic, folks have become a lot more familiar with QR codes and a lot more comfortable with scanning them. And that does reflect in some of our metrics and some of how we see users behave when it comes to QR codes. So I think that it's an important part of the spec. I think that users do seem to perform pretty well. There's a few, I think, things we would love to improve with it, but overall, it's effective.
Yeah.
Good.
I'll do +1 on.
And I added that URL to the guidelines out to the audience as well if you want to see that. But I think that it's just a great piece of it that we don't talk about as much within during these webinars. Philip, I wanted to ask you, as you know, on the enterprise side, obviously, you know, we talk a lot about consumer user bases. You have an enterprise user base. Are you seeing any like folks like being educated as consumers, coming and, you know, asking about Passkeys, or your like admin customers like asking about this? And or like, are you seeing like anything different in terms of, and again, I know we talked about, yes, like folks can sort of say you're going to sign in with this, but I know a lot of the approach that enterprises are taking is to like add it as a feature and kind of let folks opt into it. It's what I've been seeing from enterprise deployments. But is there anything like unique that you've been seeing on the enterprise side of things?
Well, the interesting thing about the enterprise is that they're all at different stages of determining the ROI for doing Passkeys. And then exactly where they'd put the stratification of the different authentication methods, right? So there's been a lot of conversations about the benefits of sync Passkeys. We turn sync Passkeys off by default as an RP, but it doesn't mean that the admin can't turn them back on. And so, you know, having the educational material and looking at what assets they choose to protect with what authentication method is really where the conversation gets interesting for us. But I think that each individual deployment is going to be very different depending on the industry, right? Whether it's financial or whether it's industrial or other, and what type of assets they're actually trying to protect. And we're going to be actually sharing some research with the FIDO Alliance coming up in probably a few weeks that my researcher did. Shauna Pettit-Brown did a piece of research just gauging our customers where they're at. And I did present last week sort of like this bell curve of, you know, people that aren't even really thinking about it to people that have already done it or thought about it, and then the in-betweeners, which are trying to help them understand what they need as table stakes, and then how can it evolve to really fit their needs, like what Intuit's done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to I just want to reiterate that it is going to depend a lot on the needs of different companies, but even within the same organization, because you can imagine a university, it's an organization. It could, but their students, they might be absolutely okay with them using synced passkeys, but maybe their sysadmins within the same company, but the same organization might have different requirements. So being able to provide that is going to be something very interesting for a lot of different places.
So we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to ask, so KPIs, measurement, how do we measure success? Like this is kind of an umbrella of a topic, but and some of the questions were like, so we talked about, yes, like a lot of like sites like Google sites, you stay signed in for a period of time. I mean, this is true on many sites. You can so of course we measure. Well, what do you measure? Is enrollment a measure of success? And like the increase in enrollment over time? These are just examples of things that people ask about. But like so enrollment, but what like usage? Like how many passkey sign-ins? I know Google had reported out about like number of passkey sign-ins over a certain period of time. What should folks be looking at, even like if they're in the planning stages, to either provide like some ROI or business case to folks, and or to measure after a deployment, or like as they're phasing out a deployment?
Adoption is one. I think that a big question that happens a lot, because this is a tech that is positioned to replace passwords, is comparative success. So having an idea of how successful or how often users are successful signing in with their traditional method, particularly passwords, as compared to passkeys over time. So beyond adoption, I think there's also this idea of like speed of sign in and success of sign in. And those are the biggest ones. Like we put out an article pretty quickly that was like, it's twice as fast and twice as successful as compared to previous methods. We also had the resources to put out a qualitative study around users' feelings about using passkeys and if they felt more convenient or more secure. And we did find that was true as well as compared to their traditional method. But again, I think like if you're just looking for basic guardrails, I would suggest some comparatives. So if you don't have base metrics right now, I would reach out to your eng team and get those rates on your methods that you already have implemented, and then you can build the same foundation for passkeys and then compare over time.
Yeah, and we've been reporting out a lot of this data from deploying orgs like Google, for example. We have a case study from Air New Zealand on our website. We have a case study from Macari as well. Now, these are two organizations that I'm mentioning that have a transaction typically after the point of sign-in. So imagine if that's you have your customer getting in faster, but also the success of that sign-in means, hey, they're going to spend more money faster. You're going to have less abandonment. They're not going to go somewhere else, right? And those two companies, like I can speak for them because they say so in these case studies, are like beside themselves with like happiness over this. Like, and now it's not just the security team or the eng team, like that. Now the retail team has their eyebrows raised, like, oh, like now sign-ins are making the retail team more money. And that is a hugely beneficial thing for the whole organization. So these are the kinds of tracking this kind of data, but then like seeing how it becomes revenue on the other side is, I think, really important to, showing the success of this. Do you want to say that, Kevin, or do you want?
We had internal chat. Yeah, there's almost, we're actually working on some worksheets. So worksheets that you can use and fill out for your own unique scenario. And it's like what Court mentioned is first you need to document all your different sign-in and recovery workflows, all those use cases, and what modalities and what methods of authentication you use at each. And then the top 5, I'd say, is just what is your adoption of Passkeys, because the benefits of Passkeys are going to be directly proportional to the adoption. And then, percent of first try sign-in success is number 1. Percent of abandonments at sign-in. So how many people abandon that sign-in screen? Percent of abandonment during account creation with username and password, if they're not able to be successful with that versus creating an account with the passkey. So comparing those metrics. And then the average time to sign in, we compare that between passwords and passkeys.
Thank you. There's there's so many more questions. I feel like, let me just ask this one. It's a more technical question, but it's not. But it's in the screens in the design guidelines. In sign in, what's the check to what goes on in the background to check for eligibility? They're not asking about eligibility, but I'll just ask anyway. Eligibility is the first thing. I guess that's for the prompt. And then how do they look for the passkey at the sign-in page, in order to, bring up the dialogue? Is that it's probably not in the screens because it's behind the scenes.
Dumb content design, not dumb content design, my non-technical knowledge, which might be the best because I learned this from my engineers. From what I understand, and my customers don't even know this, but I learned this because we were like, where do we throw an error on the passkey creation or sign in? When does that happen? So from what I understand was that, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but if we would look at your device and see if there's a signal of a passkey coming from your device, and then if there is, we check our stuff, and then if it's so it takes those 2 steps before we even know if it works or not. So we can't so we're saying in our experience, you have to go through your system dialogues to kind of have that, they call it that ceremony, and then we can be oh, it wasn't created on our end, or it's not working. So it's I don't know if that's helpful, but it's an interesting process that I'm learning as we go. And even some of the questions that I asked about, those, is it, why can we not have can we do it without passwords, and use the I forget the words, but anyway, discoverable credentials and that kind of stuff. And there's just a lot that's just a lot of partnership with my engineers to help us understand our limitations on our fraud policies, security policies, and all that stuff too. So there's a lot of ingredients in that soup, but it seems like a clear there was another script is buddies shaking hands. They're like, hey, you're there, yeah, I'm there, okay.
Yeah, and there was another question around how to deal with the deletion of a passkey, and we don't have to go through that because we're at time, but that's in the guidelines as well. How to help folks with that.
And I think that technology is changing too, a lot. I've written things about it, tell people to do that, but then I think my engineers are eventually it will already automatically happen. I'm like, yes. Oh, cool. So,
yeah, and we actually had a webinar. Folks can go back to the recording with Tim Capali last week, where he talked at length about that. So that's a good resource if you want to look at, if you want more on the dev side, that webinar was devoted to that.
Cool.
So thank you all for coming, to my esteemed panelists, to all of our attendees. It's a holiday week here in the United States. So if you're from the US, super appreciate you spending the time with us. Again, you'll be able to access this on demand as well. Any parting thoughts or anything from our expert panel?
I think Kevin and I would suggest get involved, get educated, and get started. Seek help if you need help.
Yeah, join the group. It's super fun.
I would say make sure you work with your teams on elements that aren't traditionally UX. There's a lot of policy to be written with a new factor like this, and it'll dramatically impact your user's experience. So elbow into those rooms if you have to, but Otherwise, they're going to be coming to you to write some interesting errors, interesting messages. So yeah, don't be shy about advocating for the user, kind of on all elements of this build.
And I think what I would recommend is just simply make sure to collect those qualitative data points and quantitative data points as well. These will help you sort of guide you directionally in where your experience can do more and do better, and how your adoption is going and how satisfaction is going, which I think is one of the most important things.
I guess I'll chime in as well. There's the design guidelines, there's the Figma UI kit. You can get some of the assets that were discussed today, and also the FIDO Dev community group that's hosted by Google is public and is a great resource to continue to ask questions of the community, even if you're not a FIDO Alliance member.
Well, thank you all, and we will see you all soon. Bye.